All right, today we're jumping into a source that makes a really dramatic claim that our society is caught in a deadly epidemic. We're going to walk through this argument piece by piece to see exactly how it's built.
Okay, so the whole thing kicks off with this incredibly powerful statement. By calling it an epidemic, the speaker isn't just making a point, they're framing the entire issue as a public health crisis. It sets a tone of immediate danger that shapes everything that follows.
So, the source starts by laying out what it sees as the first major symptom of this epidemic. And right away, it's presented not just as a political viewpoint, but as a kind of dangerous societal illness with a very deadly history. And to show you just how serious this is, they throw out a massive number, 140 million. The argument is that over the last 100 years, ideologies tied to radical leftism have caused that many deaths around the world. It's a number designed to really hammer home the severity of this so-called symptom. And it's not just a big number, right? The analysis breaks down how these deaths happened, things like government-created famines and intense political oppression. This all leads to a really strong conclusion within the argument, calling the ideology a death cult, putting it in the same category as groups like ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Okay, now let's pivot to the second major symptom that's presented. Here, the argument shifts its focus to another ideological movement that it says is gaining ground and feeding into this whole epidemic.
To back this up, the speaker points to some demographic data. You can see here the Muslim population in the U.S. has grown significantly in the last couple of decades. This increase is presented as a key sign of a growing ideological influence.
Now, this is a really important point the source makes. It's careful to draw a line, saying the concern isn't about the religion of Islam itself, but about a specific political movement it labels political Islam, which it connects to groups like Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood.
And this is where things get really interesting. The source claims that these two very different groups are actually forming an unlikely alliance. The argument is that even though they seem like opposites, they're increasingly found marching side by side, united by a common enemy.
But right when you think you know where this is going, that these two groups are the villains of the story, the argument takes a hard left turn. It poses a question that completely changes the game. What if we've just been looking at the symptoms and we've missed the real disease?
And the answer they give? A big no. According to the source, radical leftism and political Islam aren't the epidemic itself. No, they're just the visible signs of a much deeper, more fundamental problem infecting society.
All right, so if those are just the symptoms, what's the actual virus? Let's dig into what this analysis claims is the true root cause, the thing that's allowing all these symptoms to pop up and spread across the Western world.
And here's the core diagnosis. The real problem, according to this argument, isn't some outside force. It's an internal collapse. The virus is defined as this major breakdown of society's foundations. On one side, a perversion of education, and on the other, the breakdown of traditional Judeo-Christian values. This is the central claim.
And they don't just leave it there. They get super specific. First up, it points a finger at college campuses, calling them Marxist-dominated, which it says leads to a shutdown of real debate. Then it talks about the breakdown of the family, and finally, what the speaker argues is the biggest piece of the puzzle, a lack of God in the world. This, they say, creates a spiritual void, an existential vacuum where people feel a total lack of meaning.
Okay, so that's the theory. But how does this supposed virus of meaninglessness actually show up in the real world? The source gives us two very specific case studies to try and connect the dots.
The first case study zooms right in on New York City politics, focusing on a recent mayoral candidate. He's presented as the living, breathing result of this societal decay.
The source points out how the media was talking about this candidate, framing his campaign as this historic, groundbreaking moment, even comparing him to a civil rights legend like Jackie Robinson.
But then, the source flips that on its head. It argues that this same candidate is actually the perfect poster child for that dangerous combination of ideologies it was warning us about earlier.
All right, let's look at the second case study. This one shifts focus to the student protests that erupted on American college campuses right after the October 7th attacks on Israel.
So the source lays out this timeline, and the big question it's asking is, how could students at these top-tier schools be out protesting for Hamas, literally days after the attack, even before Israel had really responded? And it highlights the specific messages of these protests, like calls to globalize the Intifada, as being especially troubling.
And this is where it all comes full circle. The source argues that this kind of reaction is only possible in a society that's already sick with that virus. It's a sign of a terrible emptiness, a complete collapse of moral and historical understanding, which it blames squarely on the education system.
So, it all wraps up with this pretty stark warning and a call to action. The problem, as it's defined here, is a deep spiritual void. And the only fix on the table? A return to traditional Judeo-Christian principles. It's basically a final plea for Americans to wake up before things go too far.
And that really leaves us with a huge question, doesn't it? This analysis argues that when a society loses its meaning, it opens the door to radicalism. But that forces us to ask something bigger. What actually gives any society its meaning, its core identity? And what really happens when that begins to fade?